Good morning, everyone. We'll start with apologies. Don't have any apologies. Declarations of interest, none, and now on to the long-term plan 2018-28 report. And you'll see in front of you that there are a significant number of recommendations that we need to go through, and there are a number of resolutions that we have to deal with first. The first will relate to receiving the information that's contained and referred to in the staff report, including all of the documents that are attached to it. We will be noting the recommendations of the Council's Audit and Risk Management Committee, and I'll be asking the Deputy Chair of the Audit and Risk Management Committee to speak to that. And then we need confirmation of the authority of myself and the Chief Executive to sign the letter of representation to Audit New Zealand, and I'll be inviting representatives of Audit New Zealand to speak to that, speak to the report. So rather than speak generally to the report, I'll save that for when we have the debate. So I think I'll start off with formally moving the recommendations 1, 2 and 3, that we receive the information, that we note the recommendations of the Audit and Risk Management Committee and confirm the authority to sign the letter of representation, seconded by Andrew. And I'd like to begin. I just want to check with staff whether there is anything that you wanted to provide us by way of information just in relation to these three matters. If not, I'll refer to Raf Manji and ask him to speak to the Audit and Risk Management Committee report.
Thanks, Carleen. Just as flagged in the sorry, thanks.
I've been promoted.
Thank you. Sorry.
I'm the Chief Executive now.
Apologies. Thanks, Leanne. As flagged in the informal, there have been a number of minor changes to the consultation document, and those changes are flagged and highlighted in the document that's in the big tin can. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, over to you, Raf.
Yeah, thank you. So the Audit and Risk Committee is charged with approving the process for the development of the long-term plan, the draft, which includes the draft consultation document, the financial strategy and the infrastructure strategy. So we have reviewed that in process terms. We don't discuss or comment on the content. We're just there to make sure that staff have followed the appropriate process. And that all the plans do what they say they're going to do. So we have done that work. We've reviewed the draft financial strategy. We've reviewed the draft infrastructure strategy and the draft consultation document. And we're happy that the appropriate process has been followed there, and that they all link together and do what they say they're supposed to do. So we're happy to advise the Council that they can adopt that underlying information, obviously subject to the Auditor General's report, which we have received, and we're happy with that. We note that the preparation of the information has been supported by the appropriate management sign-offs and has followed the required process under the Local Government Act, and therefore recommend that the Council adopts the draft financial strategy, infrastructure strategy, and the draft consultation document, with minor amendments allowed to the GM of Finance and Commercial. So a relatively straightforward process this year in terms of that process, and so the Audit and Risk Committee is happy to sign off now to the Council to approve the draft LTP, subject to amendments on the day and subject to the Auditor General's report, which will be presented a little bit later.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions arising from the report from the Audit and Risk Management Committee? No? We'll move on. And thank you, Raf. And so the next one is the confirmation of the authority of the Mayor and Chief Executive to sign the letter of representation. Could I invite... oh, God, my brain's... Sorry, I'm just concentrating on three things at once. What's his name? Sorry, I'm having difficulty.
Liam, were you about to buy Audit New Zealand?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. So Andy Burns and Andrew Timlin.
Thank you. Sorry. I'm suffering from quake brain today. Sorry.
Good morning, everybody. There's not a lot more for me to say. That I had a conversation with the Audit Risk Management Committee last week just to confirm the audit is now complete. And we are happy to issue an unmodified opinion on your consultation document. That basically means that we've looked at the underlying supporting information that supports the document and are comfortable that it's consistent with what's reported. The key issues in the CD are what we would expect to see from the underlying information, and we're happy that that consultation document complies with various statutory requirements. So when you adopt the consultation document today, you adopt it with a clean audit opinion, and that's probably, Your Worship, as much as I should say, I think.
It's the first one we've had for a while. So thank you very much. Okay. Has anyone got any questions? Yes, Ray.
Not a question, just a comment really, just to thank Audit New Zealand for their work around this, and also I should have before to thank the Audit and Risk Committee, especially our independent chair Sue Sheldon, for the work they've done around this. Is quite a lot of work for them to do, so thank you.
Yes, no, I'll reiterate that. Thank you very much. It's a very tricky job. It's a tough job to go through such an extensive process as this, and we really appreciate the way that your team has worked so well with council staff. And thank you. All right. So I'll put those first three resolutions. This is all. They haven't been. I should have included them. Okay, so those are the three resolutions. We're simply receiving the information, noting the recommendations, and confirming the authority to sign the letter of representation. So I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you. The second, the next recommendation that we will deal with, although as I've advised you, it requires 75% approval for this to carry, but it's a temporary suspension of standing orders to enable members to speak more than once. It removes the limits on the number of speakers and the general procedure for speaking and moving motions, foreshadowed amendments and lost amendments. So to set those aside, moved by Glenn Livingston, seconded by Tim Scandrett. I shall put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. I was expecting at least one no. That's carried. Thank you. So the next one is it adopts the information that provides the basis for the council's draft and relied on by the content of it to be adopted by council. So I'm just working out where the amendments fit. Are they further on, or where do we? Yeah, take it. Just go on.
Can I just assist? If you go over the page, you'll see where you explain that before the council can adopt the consultation document, must first adopt the information that provides the basis for the information in the consultation document, and then you invite any people, any members who might want to make amendments move amendments.
Okay, so all right, well, Ian has just explained what I should have explained, which was that before we can adopt the consultation document, we must first adopt the information that provides the basis for the Council's draft 2018-28 long-term plan and relied on by the content of the consultation document. And so at this point, we open up the matter for discussion, any relevant amendments that may be moved. I do actually have an amendment, and I'm still working on the detail of it, and there are a couple of others who are in the same position. So I'm just going to adjourn the meeting just for the next 15 minutes, and so we'll reconvene at 9:48, 10:05. At 10:05, so that's time for people to go and get a coffee if they want to and bring it back. But I just want to adjourn the meeting so that we can get the wording of the amendments agreed. My one involves an amendment to one of the questions to be asked in the consultation document. So I just want to get the wording of that crystal clear. I do want to kind of signal it to the audit office because they won't know about it, but I don't think that there will be a problem with it. And just to tidy up, I know that Yanni's got an amendment in relation to level of service, and Sarah's got an amendment in relation to some advice that is required before the LTP is signed off. So we'll just get the wording finalised. So if people could be back here at 10:05. Thank you. I apologise for the delay because there was some wording changes to the consultation document. I'm just looking for comfort at the end of the room that people are nodding and smiling, so I'm assuming that the wording is okay.
Yes, it is okay, Leanne. There was just one minor little tweak that we thought, rather than creating a prioritisation framework, about agreeing one.
So it's on your screen now. Agree to rather than develop. Because we've already actually, rather than establish. To agree and prioritise. Is that right?
Yeah. Okay. So we're just going to change the word establish to agree to a prioritisation framework. So I'll just quickly run through it. That and I'm not going to specifically speak to it as such, but there has been a lot of feedback expressing community concerns about the dangers presented at a range of intersections, and the example I've used is Harewood, Breens and Gardeners Rows, and I know that Aaron Kewen will speak to that, but also the state of many of our streets and footpaths. As a council, we wish to agree to a prioritisation framework for intersection improvements and street and footpath renewals, which ensures that we're meeting the needs of our residents, and that's making it crystal clear that it's the needs of our residents that we wish to prioritise, and asking our residents what do they think we should take into account when prioritising the work that needs to be done, and do you think the priorities should be informed by the local community board? And I guess that's a bit of an open question. It's pretty plain that local community boards know more about their local areas and the priorities in their local areas than we do collectively as a council. So but we want people to turn their attention to the fact that community boards play this important role in terms of priorities. So let's hear what the public have to say in relation to that. So I'm not moving that as an amendment. I've written that into the resolution, which I will now move, and seconded by Andrew.
Can I just butt in there, please? I think this is better down where we'd start dealing with the consultation document rather than the underlying information that you're going to adopt first.
Oh, okay.
So that's the next bit over page. Just out there.
Yeah, but if we're adopting the consultation for
You don't do that to the end. It's the background information.
That's
Yes, I know.
where you include any amendments you want to make. The first step is to adopt the information that forms the basis of the proposed LTP and is relied on by the consultation document.
Well,
That's your first step.
one of the amendments that we have got amends the background information as in one of the levels of service.
That's fine, but I'm just looking at this one that you want to go. Is that where it's going to go?
Sorry, I'm just a little unclear. So do you want to highlight that and copy it, and we'll put it somewhere else?
Up a bit.
Well, can you put it between 9 and 10? Okay. So where would that where would the Councillor Johansson's amendment sits here.
Do they relate to the information?
Yes, his
okay, well
does.
then they should be dealt with. You move adoption of the information and noting where it can be found, and then amendments can be slotted in there.
So Councillor Johansson moved by way of amendment that, so put that in between 5 and 6, or is it?
Put it after 6. Or no, that's
no. Actually,
we have
to amend it first. So put it above 5.
Well, all you're doing is moving the adoption at this stage, and then you're opening it up for discussion and amendments, and then you vote.
Oh, okay.
So we need to get the document itself on the table.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we have moved. Sorry. Yeah, I know. I'm just confused as to why one goes there and one gets moved, but that's all right. But that means that we can't debate my amendment. Well, what
you will when we get
to the
once we've
consultation
adopted
document.
the information, we then move to adopting the consultation document, and that's when the meeting can discuss your proposed amendment to the consultation document.
Okay. All right. All right. So it's been moved and seconded, and there's a first amendment, Councillor Sarah Templeton, and that's seconded by Anne Galloway. So I'll put that amendment. Do you want to speak to the amendment?
Just briefly, in fact, it's not quite the wording. It's just there was a couple of extra words that got sent round to all the councillors just before. Just in a realistic time frame, with enough information to inform the final decision. Because it might be that there's some sort of cost-benefit stuff or disadvantages, advantages information, not just the time frame and the cost, that councillors will need to inform their decision. There was email round. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. I mean, this section of Coastal Pathway is the last section. It's the most difficult. It's also the most dangerous. And there's not enough funding currently on budget to get it built. There's probably enough to do some design work, but we are unsure about that. This section is dangerous at the moment because there used to be a footpath around this corner connecting these two communities, and really, really highly used one on the weekends. And that footpath was taken away as part of the Littleton Road corridor, the mass movement and the rockfall risk works, and it was on the other side of the road. It's not able to be put back there. It needs to be cantilevered out. In the annual plan last year, we brought forward some Coastal Pathway funding and some other funding to enable the Christchurch Yacht Club to build the first section around this corner that they already had the design work done on. And getting this information, and I'm aware that there will be submissions on this during the long-term plan, will allow us to make a decision in June whether or not to include funding for this really dangerous section of footpath around the corner.
Very good. Yanni, Glenn?
I guess we're in debate, so probably not questions.
We're just doing the amendment.
Yeah, no,
there are
I know,
two amendments.
I understand that. But just, I think the other thing for this one is, like, this is a cycleway. And so, you know, we're spending a fortune on cycleways, and this is one of the most obvious places where people cycle, whether it's recreation or commute. And it does seem to me that when this information comes back, we should actually be talking to NZTA again about getting it as part of an MCR. It just seems ludicrous that it's not being included and that it's taking so long, because this is an area that has had lots of, I think, risk, and it definitely needs to be addressed, and so I'm very supportive of what's been put.
Back, Glenn.
Oh, thank you. Just hearing the words cantilevered out onto the estuary. Okay, so I think we need to include environmental costs in this. I'm sure. Yeah, absolutely. So it's not just financial. That the Ihitai Trust and others will be watching closely.
Right. Phil.
Look, I'm happy to support this. Everyone would like to see this actually happen. The costs are going to be, they'll be useful to have, because clearly they're going to be quite significant. And I'm sure that there'll be further debate though too in terms of the affordability of this project, which is recreational, as against the commuter cyclists that Councillor Johansson referred to within the major cycleways program. So whether central government come up with some more funding for that, we perhaps can find out. But in the meantime, I'm certainly happy to support this amendment.
Yep. Good. All right, I'll put that motion.
Just a correction that this particular section isn't a recreational route. This is a core council business section of footpath that we've taken away on one side of the road due to life risk, and we're obliged as a council to put a safe pedestrian footpath back, whether or not it's coastal pathway or whatever. As a council, we need to provide a footpath for our residents around this dangerous corner.
Right, so I will put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. And Councillor Johansson has an amendment which I'll second. Over to you, Yanni.
Very briefly, I just think there's been a lot of public concern at the state of our parks, and I understand the intent behind removing the words, which is that it's quite hard to measure, but I actually think in terms of the public perception of us aiming to be, a beautiful garden city again, it's really important that we reinstate these words. So I've just suggested that we actually just leave these words in rather than delete them as is currently proposed. And I don't think it makes any material difference to the way in which staff will run the contracts, but I think it does send a signal to the community that we do want our parks to be clean and tidy.
Dion? So I'll just speak to it briefly because, and I'll come to it perhaps more when we get to the consultation document, but I made quite a thing about the fact that we are really proud of our status as New Zealand's garden city, and we can't afford to lose that, and we need to think about what that means in the 21st century. And I know that the no-mow trial has had its challenges, and that's partly why we're reviewing that now, so that we can gain the benefits that it was intended to achieve, while at the same time ensuring that we retain that status. So that's why I'm backing the clean and tidy amendment. Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. And now I'll put the amended motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Now we move on to receiving Simpson Grierson's advice on the consultation document and its compliance with the requirements of the Local Government Act. We received the Auditor General's report, and that the consultation document include the following questions, which relate to intersection safety and the state of roads and footpaths, and that we adopt the consultation document for consultation, including the Auditor General's report. I'd like to move this, seconded by Andrew. So I'd like to open the debate by referring to the introduction that I wrote to the long-term plan, to the consultation document, and that is that, and the phrasing that I've used is "we're in this together," and the reason that I've used that phrase "we're in this together" indicates that there is nothing that we can do alone, that we can't do better when we actually collaborate with others. And that means collaborating with central government, but it also means collaborating with our communities. Our communities are our front line when it comes to noticing when things are wrong. We are completely and utterly dependent on people letting us know when there are potholes, letting us know when there are rubbish bin overflows, although I do tend to blame those that leave the rubbish as the culprits in that regard. But it is important that we are hearing from our community all the time, but that they see themselves as partners with us in order to ensure that, one, we maintain our garden city status, but also that we're able to achieve a lot more by way of community engagement and community involvement in their own facilities. We have established a set of strategic priorities which form the platform for the way that we're thinking as a council, enabling active citizenship and connected communities. And that means, you know, communities being able to do things for themselves with our support, not council abandoning communities, but actually engaging communities in the whole process. And I love, for example, the Governor's Bay Jetty story, and I love the story of the community facility that's being developed at the church in South Brighton. You know, that when communities take ownership and actually put their own resources and time and energy into the particular project, it means so much more. It's way more meaningful, and we are enriched by what communities are able to contribute. Maximising opportunities to develop a vibrant, prosperous and sustainable 21st century city. We have to think about sustainability, and that's what I often say, and I've said in the introduction, that what a garden city is in the 21st century is quite different from what it was when I was growing up. You know, back in the day it was more about the parks and the gardens and the flowers, but now it's about sustainability, it's about environmental protection, it's about ecological values, it's about clean rivers, clean air and food resilience. That's what a garden city is, a sustainable 21st century city is today. But the vibrancy and the prosperity, we must have those as well. And I know that you know, that we look at some of the central city projects that we would have liked to have seen further advanced, but the idea of having a central city that people love to come into, people love to live in, you know, again, just love to see more people living in the central city. That is an important part of that vibrancy. And of course, prosperity is for all. This is, we frame ourselves as a city of opportunity for all. This is no one left behind. This is everyone having the opportunity. Climate change leadership, and you know, it's really important that we take a leadership role. We can't sit back and wait for somebody else to do it for us. We have to lead. Cities around the world are acknowledging that. Even when the United States pulled out of the Paris Accord, the cities, they all put their hands up and said, we will take on that challenge ourselves. And as was said by our own Prime Minister actually quite recently, these can't just be seen as challenges, because with every challenge comes an opportunity to develop new technologies, to be leading the way, and I think that it is an opportunity for our city to be doing that, and we know that from disaster comes opportunity as well. Informed and proactive approaches to natural hazards risks. Well, you know, the fact that we're actually technically still in a state of emergency while we debate this, you know, is just a constant reminder of the state that we're in. Increasing active public and shared transport opportunities and use. I think I've expressed myself many times about how concerning it is that that public transport hasn't really been able to take off in Christchurch the way it could have after the earthquakes. And safe and sustainable water supply and improved waterways. These are all priorities for us. We have a lot of challenges though, and as I've said in the plan, we're investigating a whole range of options. Rates income is not going to be a sustainable way of funding this council or other councils into the future, and we need to be working with central government about different ways of funding. But the reality of this long-term plan, the most important message is that we have still got a long way to go in terms of our recovery, in terms of the work that still needs to be done, and it is going to take some time, and it does take a lot of resources to recover from a circumstance such as that we've experienced. So it does mean that we look to central government in a way. The government has made commitments to Christchurch with a stated desire to negotiate a global settlement. And a capital acceleration facility is being developed. With this comes the promise of a partnership approach to our relationship with central government, which I believe can expand well beyond our rebuild and our regeneration opportunities. And so I come back to the phrase, we're in this together, and I think we can achieve a lot more, and we invite our communities to have a say in relation to their long-term plan. And I hope that out of this process we develop a very clear vision for the future of our city. So I will open it up for debate. Andrew.
Thank you. And there's been some commentary about the 5.5% rate rise that we're proposing as part of this draft long-term plan. And 5.5% rates rise is certainly more than some of us would ideally like to see. Although the level of rates rise, of course, is directly related to what we're able to deliver operationally in terms of levels of service and in terms of the capital programme relating to both horizontal and vertical infrastructure in particular. So our clear intention as set out in this plan is to keep rate rises to a minimum whilst meeting community expectations around what we do and continuing to see an increase in the standard of the roads and footpaths and pipes, that key horizontal infrastructure, realising that we've still got a huge amount of work to do to get this back to pre-earthquake levels. Finding the balance between these considerations, what we spend the money on and what a reasonable level of rates rise would be, certainly hasn't been easy, and it's something that we've been working on for at least the last 6 months, quite possibly longer. So today we'll approve the draft long-term plan to go out for consultation, and it's important that we hear from the community about what the community thinks the right balance is and what they think about the balance that we've found, whether we've got it right, whether we should be doing more, whether we should be doing less, and of course realising that to do more costs more and to do less costs less. We think we've got the balance right with that 5.5% rates rise, and the amount of work that we're doing in each area really reflects that, but we're certainly very keen to hear from the community whether the community thinks that we've got that right. For Banks Peninsula, I'm keen to see investment proposed into the Akaroa Wharf development, the Naval Point development plan finally, and continued commitment to significant infrastructure projects such as the Akaroa wastewater scheme. These are all projects that are proposed to be done and completed within the life of this plan, some of them sooner rather than later. And whilst I know that rates rises will be felt on Banks Peninsula, as they will in other parts of the city, I also know that the peninsula is seeing significant investment into key infrastructure. I know there'll be submissions relating to new projects, many of which are actually partnership opportunities with communities, and just reflecting on the Mayor's words, that's something that we welcome. And things that we would really welcome the opportunity to consider as part of our deliberations on the draft as we move into the final long-term plan. Really keen to hear from as many community members as we can around what they think we should be doing and how we should be doing it so that we can respond effectively to those submissions and make changes between this draft, and it is a draft, and the final long-term plan as we approve it at the end of June. So I'll be interested to hear the community feedback, and it's important that we do hear that. We've done a lot of work since the earthquakes as a council, and we've already invested heavily in the recovery and regeneration of our city. We've still got a lot to do. This is the opportunity for us to hear from the community about what our priorities should be as we plan what really is the next 10 years of activity, improvement, investment and expenditure. And my key message is that we welcome that feedback from the community. I really want people to be engaging with this important document through the consultation document and the draft LTP so that we can absolutely get this right in terms of what the community wants us to be doing over the next 10 years.
Yeah. Sarah?
I'm going to vote in favour clearly of the draft today, in spite of having some really serious concerns, because we need to hear from our communities about what they think before we make a final decision. Mine is only one opinion, and if people share it, then they need to speak out, submit and speak at the hearings. There's a real disconnect between what we say are our priorities, climate change leadership, waterways, enabling active citizenship, increasing active public and shared transport opportunities, and what we're currently proposing to fund. Enabling active communities and citizenship. I don't know if you remember that in the Metro funding round last year, we had a unanimous decision of councillors to increase in the draft LTP the amount of community funding available to enable our citizens to, in fact, contribute more to their communities. We decided that we would like to put in 10% more this year and then make it inflation adjusted after that. That would be $750,000 approximately, less than 10% of what we're putting into the cathedral. Many community events such as Carols by Candlelight are at risk because council has increased costs of compliance and made it more difficult for these groups to run valued events, even with the number of volunteer hours that they're able to get. Not putting this funding in now simply means that we will face the same situation again next year, having to say no to many of those active citizen groups who want to contribute to the city but struggle with funding and the sustainability of the sheer number of volunteer hours involved. Our major cycle routes. Failing in our commitment to combat climate change in our low-lying city is a dereliction of duty for our citizens, especially when climate change leadership is a priority. Transport emissions make up 40% of our emissions as a city. January was our hottest on record, and yet we had 2 flooding events. The cycleways are an easy target, but they are the biggest thing that we can do as a city to mitigate the impacts of increased extreme weather events on our city. And setting aside climate change, as if we could, I am simply not sure that the simple economic realities of our transportation system have sunk in around the table. We're expecting 10,000 more people to be working in the central city in the next 3 years. 83% of them will be in single occupancy cars if nothing changes. That's over 8,000 more cars in the central city, and as well as the increased congestion, we simply cannot afford to build another 10 Litchfield Street car parking buildings at $32 million each to store them all in. Our central city was dying before the earthquakes, and simply putting back the same 20th century infrastructure back will get the same result. Do we want our CBD to thrive, or are we happy to let it die? Cycleways are hard. They're controversial and they're difficult everywhere. They take real leadership to implement, and that's not what this LTP is offering our communities. We have heard at the highest levels that climate change is the nuclear-free moment of our generation, and we as a council have signed the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate Change, committing us to get Christchurch to net neutrality by 2050. We committed to action, not just nice words on paper. It is difficult, but it is essential.
Yeah. The long-term plan 2018 to 28, the 10 years, is very, very important for our city, particularly for the future of our city. If we review all the vision, if this city is a city of opportunity, we are open to new ideas, new people, new ways of doing things, a place where anything is possible. But we are aware, last year we already launched the multicultural strategy. Also, that kind of the vision and the purpose, one aspect, we respect all the treaty of Waitangi, the one. But the other aspect is our commitment, give every person feels a sense of belonging, and also its commitment by the council to give every person an equal opportunity to access our services, information, as well as participate in the decision-making process. If today we review all those 6, the strategic direction to fulfill, to implement of this, the vision, you can see, for instance, like one, the particular mayor, she mentioned earlier, enabling active citizenship and connected community. But we need to be aware, we need to kind of a new way. If before we follow our publication to the geographic area, then we need to reform not only geographic, but it's demographic. Because in this city, the 25% of people was born overseas. We need to face this fact. How do we to improve this consultation to give every person equal opportunity to get this information, then they can feedback to the council. So if that's true, we are not only focused on our tradition. I know that's very, very basic, infrastructure, because that's in related to our the health, our well-being. We still follow, but we still put a big amount of money on that, like a water supply, like a road, like a stormwater, like a park, river. That's absolutely very important. But regarding to if this the city is the city of opportunity, how do we to give those people a sense, strong sense, they are part of the city? So my view, we need to strengthen the civic international relations, this group. I'm not sure whether there are big sufficient resources can meet these needs. I'm not sure. Also regarding the community service department, if the budget is not sufficient, then we open to the public. We welcome them, they can feedback to make the happen. And also this city is an innovation city, so particular the mayor also mentioned, or we are in this together. If we saw this the city of innovation city, not only in Christchurch we can make that happen, we need to welcome the regional, national, and even overseas working together, participate, invest in this city. But how do we to make that happen? We need to be think about it. How do we to working together? And also this innovation, we thought that's a new growth, new technology. But how do we get this one? Whether we create a good environment to can be make this happen. Not only council need to think about it, but the community also need to think about it. The other one is I'm particularly would like to emphasize regarding to our 10 million for Christchurch Square. Because why? Because I still got several emails from low socio-economic people. They're pretty concerned. This is the kind of regressive tax. But I still would like to talk to them, Actually, this is a small amount. Per year, only 7.19. Per week, only 13 cents. Easy to be the collector. And also, even we extension for the 10 years, but actually through the fundraising, through the St. Auckland Church, the fundraising, probably only five years we can start. So not big a burden for those people. I study economics. I fully understand the regressive, progressive tax. I just want to then know, but still welcome them can be the feedback. Last one is I would like to emphasize community facility. I'm happy, regarding the Southwest, the new library and also service center and the leisure center still put on the budget. Let's carry forward. I'm honest. I review those master plan. Actually, the new Hornby Library Service Center will be open in July of last year, same as the Bishadale, the Service Center, Community Center, Library, and the same as the Sumner one, but we are delayed. But many reasons. But right now, the location, right now, the consultation for reclassification for Reserve Act, there's the timing we need to go on to be more faster. We need to community also working with the council together. But anyway, this is just the draft, the long-term plan, but it's highly in relation to everyone. So we encourage all the people, community feedback to us. Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to say a huge thank you to staff, actually even the legal team. Because this has been a huge and mammoth task getting this together, and even the consultation document, which has been rewritten, I don't know, 120 times. This is fantastic to see something that's ready to go out. And I think the acknowledgement is particularly due because looking at the numbers, it is particularly hard. If we look on page 17 of our documents and page 7 of the actual report, it says about the cost, the council is left with 7.7 billion to fund by way of rates, debts and other sources from the earthquake costs. So the concept that the government was going to come in here and help us and everything would be hunky-dory and everything would look like it used to, was completely illusory. And the costs that remain, according to Deloitte's, a reasonably independent source of information, they've cost the council, the earthquakes have so far cost the council about 3.6 billion, and the remaining capital to be paid over the next 30 years is 5.7 billion. That's the scope of the problem that this 10-year plan attempts to sort out in a way that leaves at least marginally affordable rates. And that's for a council that previously had very low debt levels and also owned major assets. So thank goodness in this case for Orion and the airport, which have enabled us to do a capital release without selling them, but to use their assets, well, all the assets, but most of it comes from Orion and the airport, in terms of raising capital bonds. I think if we look at the future of this over the next 30 years, the fact that we have to find this sort of money means that we do have to look at new ways of doing things and be open to new ideas and look at other possibilities. And that's why in the consultation document we ask people, do they want to look at other funding mechanisms? So Auckland, for example, which apparently faces the problems of high growth, is allowed to have a fuel tax. Christchurch, which faces the major ramifications of still needing to spend 5.7 billion over the next 30 years on a major disaster recovery, just to get things back to where they were in terms of stormwater, drainage, water, all of those sorts of things. If we had had, for example, a 4 cents a litre fuel tax, our rate rise this year would have been around 1.9%. Because the additional income that would come in operationally from that would be the equivalent to about 3-point-something% on rates. And I think we need to look at, and I'm glad that we've asked people about what are the other ways that we can actually raise monies, because rates have never been, and I did my Pulsi thesis, my master's thesis on local government finance, and looked at rating as a mechanism. Even then, which was a long time ago, it wasn't a good mechanism for equity or anything. It's still not, and actually if you look at the impact of this, it's actually doesn't work as the largest form of income generation for us. We've also asked, because we explored the possibility of looking at, was there some way in which we could actually recoup some benefit to the community from water bottling plants, because the community does not love them in any way, shape or form. We've struggled with the concept of a targeted rate, we've struggled with all sorts of ways of doing it, and I have to say the legal team have been very thorough on looking at what we can do. So we've asked the question, just in case, in terms of the wisdom of the crowds, there are ways that other people have thought of that we haven't yet. Because if people extract billions of litres of water, they need to actually be able to the community needs to recoup something from that, or at least get something back from that major extraction. So I'm hoping that in terms of the submissions that we get, that we will get people looking at the fact that looking forward, rates are, as you say, Leanne, not a sustainable way of funding such massive repairs. And I don't actually ever understand why Auckland can have something and we can't. I just never get that. It makes no sense to me whatsoever that they can have a fuel tax and we couldn't, even if 99% of our population wanted it. So I'm keen that we keep asking those questions if that's what the people of Christchurch actually want, because I think looking at this, it's very difficult, and I think people have done amazingly well to put this together, but it's this is a very different budget than if you looked at the Christchurch budget 20 years ago.
and looking forward, it doesn't get a whole lot better, just in terms of debt and other things that need doing.
Right. Well, my heart rate's down a little now. I'm a bit more relaxed. I was going to come in here today. I'd lost a bit of sleep the last few days leading into this because I had a fight to pick with my fellow councillors and mayor, and that fight's now over. Thanks to the mayor, and I do sincerely thank you for coming up with a solution to an issue that is not mine. It's an issue of my community. And it was a lady who couldn't walk her children to school, had a problem, and brought it up. And hopefully we will now have a solution, and in part 9 up there we can see it, and that is the public having the opportunity to feed back on the intersections they feel are dangerous. And also it gives the public the opportunity and community boards the opportunity to tell us where they want to see road improvements when it comes to the surfaces or footpaths. A couple of my fellow councillors have raised that. They have footpaths in the areas where there's only one on one side of the street. Well, we have one up in Herwood which has got no footpath on either side of the street, and everyone at the table will now get ready to put your cringe faces on when you look at me, because my children are driven to school. And they're driven to school because where we live and all our neighbours, and there's 9 school-aged children in our little cul-de-sac, there is no footpaths between our properties and town, and there'd be a couple of hundred children in that area. So that's a section of Gardeners Road where it's 80k an hour. There are no footpaths on either side of the road or cycleway, and there's also no verge. There's some long grass to walk through on a wet day, and that's for the parents that will let their children go down there. Now, some of the kids do bike down there to go to school, but my wife you'd categorise her as a worrywart, is one term you could use. She says my 10-year-old son has no road sense. There's a lot of women out there who'd say that about all men, but that is my son, and so he can't bike to school. I'm a little more relaxed on the rules and would probably let him, because I've biked down that road myself, but 80k an hour, a lot of trucks, it's probably not the best idea. So thank you very much, Leanne, for including that in the consultation document. I hope we do receive a lot of feedback, and if we don't get feedback and support from the community on the particular named intersection, then that'll be the last you hear of it from me, if it doesn't come back, but I assume we will, so we'll leave that there. Now, there's a couple other issues I want to raise. One is, and I've been contacted by a number of people around the 5.5% rates rise. That's the one part of this whole consultation process I don't like and don't support. I'm not into 5.5% when our inflation rate's 1.9. I don't believe we've done enough to reduce our spending. I think our community facilities that we're putting in are way over-specced and far too flash for the type of city we really are, and we need to be more realistic about that. Once upon a time, when I was a kid growing up, I'm not that old, you know, I know I look 28, but I'm actually considerably older than that. You don't look 28. Well, thanks, Tim. When I was growing up, a community hall was a box, essentially. Sometimes they were converted school buildings and so on and so forth, but it was a box that housed the community that you met in. They had craft groups, they had scout groups, they had all sorts of people using them, karate groups, and you had a working kitchen. Normally everything was stainless steel, and some toilets that were pretty basic, but they worked. And at some point this city flipped the switch, and now our community facilities win architectural awards, and they're on funny angles, and they've got imported glass, and it's just the miracles of the building industry. But is that really what we need? I know it's what a lot of us would like and we want, but I don't believe we can afford it, and that is something we've never addressed. We've never asked the community, are these the facilities you actually really want? Because this is the cost, and it's 5.5% when inflation's 1.9%. And I think of that massive population in our city who are on a fixed income because they're retired, and they may be asset rich because they worked hard throughout their lives to live in good neighbourhoods that cost them a great deal of money to be there, and now they can't afford to stay there. And as a council we say, just sell your property or take a reverse mortgage. That's unacceptable. We should be facilitating the way people want to live their lives, not telling them how they should live their lives. So I invite more people in this LTP to submit on how they don't want us to spend money. I don't want to hear from that normal 500 to 1,000 people that tell us how much more they want. I want to hear from those that want to tell us how much less they want us to spend. It's easy to add on, it's a little harder to take off. And then I'll go down to, I want to follow on from what Vicky said around funding mechanisms, because the rating model is a bit of a flawed model and we are lucky to have the assets we do. But let's hear from those other people out there we haven't heard from yet that can partner with the council and create revenue for the city from things we've never thought of. What are all of those ideas and concepts in a way forward that create employment and create income for the city? There's social enterprises that could be social enterprises that are a partnership with the city that don't cost us money, they actually make us money and create employment. What do they look like and what are those ideas and models? Let's see those, and that can help reduce our rates increases. And finally, the cycleways, because I know it's going to come up this time, and I've been a supporter. A few years back I was the one that added in the $20 levy for active transport, and it included the coastal pathway, which I will say will become the hottest ride in the country. It is going to be so popular. I will consider myself to put in a bike hire / roller skating, and I just gave the idea away, business at the estuary end, but that will be a booming business. That place is going to be amazing. So let's get on and get that finished. And then there's the head-to-head walkway and the cycleways. But the budget's gone crazy on the cycleways, and no doubt we will hear back about that. And I can handle that a little because there is a decent government subsidy involved. But what I am struggling with is the uptake in people cycling. I don't think it's good enough for a city that's flat, that the weather is majority really good. We've got to face it, we're quite lazy as people, Christchurch. We're lazy. It's an easy city to bike in, but we're doing no promotion to make cycling the new black. That is where you fall down. Westfield would never spend a couple of $100 million building a complex and then spend a few thousand promoting it. It would fall over. Cycleways, we have to do the same. So whether that money comes from government, I've brought it up at Health Board because they get a big win out of it, or it comes from council, wherever, we have to promote the cycleways. They are going to be a gem of the city. We've just got to get everyone on board and wanting them more and embracing them more.
Thanks, Leanne. I'd like to start by thanking the staff too. This has been an enormous amount of work, and I think the staff and councillors have worked really well together to come up with the consultation document. And clearly, this is a time too when, as a council, we take stock of looking at the future challenges and what we need to budget for in terms of our key projects. And so that challenge is, I think, that clearly, and it's in the document, that it's that balance between what people expect around delivery of our services and our ability as a council to fund those costs through rates and debt, unless we are able to come up with some other methods of funding, as Vicky suggested. And I think one of the difficulties for us as a council was that earlier on, several terms back, there were some early public announcements after the 2011 earthquakes that really have led to some quite unrealistic public expectations about what in fact could be delivered. And I think having all of our city streets fixed straight away is probably an example. And clearly from the document, and especially around the horizontal infrastructure part, the challenge actually is really enormous. So we're making a great start. I think the document is about how we can work to become more resilient in the face of, and to be prepared for future events. And I guess having the event like we had yesterday and last night reminds us that in fact this is a series, and like last year we also had the Port Hills fire, and this has been a series of flood events which when it comes to climate change we need to be prepared for. So I think the consultation clearly is about a balance between those key challenges, earthquake recovery and maintenance of our services, and then we need to plan for at least medium population growth as against affordability through mainly rates. So I think given those challenges and the costs since 2011, compared with other cities that haven't had to address such the massive impact of a major earthquake on our infrastructure, Christchurch has been doing remarkably well, and I'm sure will continue to. But those flooding events of last night, and clearly we dodged more than a bullet, it was like dodging a shotgun cartridge. That reminds us, though, how much we have to prepare for climate change, and climate change and leadership is clearly a key community outcome for us and is a key strategic direction that we need to make sure happens. And I guess that's something, actually, the weather is often discussed in the media, but not the importance of climate change and how, in fact, the other key strategic direction for us to be informed and proactive and taking those approaches around our natural hazard risk or risks. So, and I think our infrastructure strategy is really clear about the projects for resilience and the natural hazards and the long-term sea level rise and climate change. And clearly some of our assets in the longer term are going to need to be moved to higher ground. So, and I'm encouraged, and we've done a lot of work on this, that in the long-term plan there's a lot of mitigation measures, including, for example, stop banks and the detention ponds. And clearly we are going to prioritise work and ask residents to comment on this about how we reduce flood risk in some areas, and particularly for people who are vulnerable. So overall, I'm really pleased that the long-term plan makes provision, particularly for the natural hazards area, and that we maintain a prudent level of headroom in the event of a further large-scale natural disaster. There's reference right at the end of the consultation document in relation to heritage and the Central City Landmark Grant Fund, and recent examples where we all visited was the Midland Club on Oxford Terrace. And to keep that fund going, I think, is essential, and I hope that residents comment on that. And the old post office in the square is an example of where I think as a council we will need to retain the Central City Landmark Grant Fund. So clearly in the consultation document, we've prioritised projects as a council, and I believe we've been really responsible in our approach. And I, along with others, councillors, I hope that the consultation document, that it generates a good number of submissions about residents' priorities, and so that we're also well informed when we do our final decision making.
Thank you, and I wanted to take this chance just to affirm your early call on that state of emergency. I was going to say that anyway, and then I saw the email come through, Mayor, but I thought that was a very good call. And I also wanted to acknowledge the staff, including the financial staff who were part of the civil defence team yesterday and have had to back up today, being here for the draft long-term plan. My views on where we're at with our plan are that it seems to me we're still living in what I would call a tension between the council's delivery of what it delivers, the more basic needs around the city, and the aspirational, which we're planning as well, 7 years after the quakes. And we're reminded of this tension occasionally through commentary, mass media, social media, etc. You know, what are you doing with our rates? You know, we see these as the priorities. Have you got it right? So this long-term plan process will be an opportunity for the public, and I really hope people who may not have thought of coming into council before really take this opportunity to come in and tell us. So it's one thing to say it in social media, mass media, come in and let's have that conversation face to face. We have many opportunities ahead of us. Personally, I feel a bit caught as a city councillor, party to the letter of expectations with regen over areas such as the residential red zone, of which I'm also the ward councillor for much of that. I'm starting to get a bit antsy over progress. I do understand the process and where it's at, but I really want some movement in the residential red zone. It's an opportunity for us vis-a-vis climate change. You know, without it doesn't have to involve necessarily millions in the beginning for us to get started and demonstrably show we are committed to mitigating some of the effects of climate change through treating good parts of the residential red zone as a climate sink. There are other ways of maximising our income. If you look at the dividend payment from our companies, they comprise 20% of our income. So my question would be, in this process, are we maximising the dividend return from all our companies, especially the bigger ones? I'm not going to single any out at this stage, but that's just a question I'd like to leave. Are we maximising the return from all our companies? And the councillors and others will know what I'm talking about when they look at the figures there. But let's hear from the community. It's really important you have your say. The council has always had, I think, a fairly vigorous relationship with the community here in Christchurch. It's kind of the dynamic of the city. It's a city village, and people pre and post earthquake have always challenged the council. So keep doing that and come and see us, and let's have this conversation. Let's just get it out there. Thank you.
Thank you. I support the long-term plan consultation document being adopted for consultation. Look, I may not necessarily agree with all of the aspects of the LTP as it's proposed, but I'm very keen to see the citizens of Christchurch express their opinion on the various aspects of the LTP and give us some priorities as to what they think. These opinions, I believe, will go a long way to giving us some direction for the final content of the LTP. Personally, I'm actually very supportive of giving greater attention to our traditional core values of council, provision of services, roading, three waters, for example. In my mind, there's still a huge amount of recovery of our infrastructure post-earthquake. Really a high degree of prioritisation will be needed to ensure that the worst is dealt with first. I'm quite encouraged with our LTP vision. Christchurch is a city of opportunity for all, open to new ideas, new people and new ways of doing things. A city where anything is possible. And I'm struggling to learn that off by heart because I think it's something that we're probably going to trot out fairly well all the time. It's a great vision, but I still really am focused on the City Council giving core functions of its operation greater emphasis. However, I'm a great supporter of this vision, and particularly the two last phrases, new ways of doing things, and a city where anything is possible. It's quite obvious, and previous speakers have emphasised this, that the rates model is becoming a burden for our ratepayers. So I look forward to the citizens of Christchurch through this consultation process giving us some direction and support for new ideas to develop complementary models that will enable us to complete our earthquake repairs and then consequently the city to be able to return to a more business as usual model. Thank you.
We've got Tim.
Thank you. I totally support the long-term plan, the draft long-term plan. I'm very much looking forward to getting the feedback from our citizens. In business, it's very simple in that you do needs and wants. You deliver what you need to, and then you cut the wants to what you can do. With our city, it's a lot different. We have needs, and we have have-tos, and then we have the wants. And this is what I think we're going to really hear from our community. As elected members, we've heard from community groups, interest groups, but as community board members, we've also heard from the general communities as a whole. So I think that we as individuals are going to get some interesting feedback from our communities with regards to our 5.5 rates and what our communities and our citizens want. As we've heard that some communities are more resilient than others, with the Governor's Bay Jetty as one example. But communities are very much like people. some need more help than others, but all are equal. So we've got to take that on as councillors and not look at our personal and our own communities, but the city as a whole. And that's a responsibility that we all have over and above our community boards. My young colleague Erin here mentioned about I'm still waiting for the 21st party invite. The community facilities becoming palaces or being designed so. If we were really looking at these, and I do think we got carried away following the earthquake and rebuilding some of these, if we had a one design but made bigger or smaller to fit the community's needs, because the key to a community centre is access for all, whether they have a disability, whether it's physical or intellectual, or whether they're perfectly healthy. It's about putting community use into those buildings. I think we could have done a lot better, and hopefully we're going to get some feedback from our communities with regards to that. Recently I crossed the floor and spoke to a hearing on behalf of the Summit Road Protection Authority with regards to closing the proposal to close the Summit Road from Raupaki to Gebbies Pass overnight. We as a city have pushed for recreation and our people to get out and get healthy. We've been incredibly successful with that. We now have over 1 million people a year using the tracks and paths between Godley Head and Gebbies Pass, which is absolutely outstanding. But we don't follow it up by protecting those environments. Our generation are the ones that have to clean up our rivers. Our generation are the ones that have to protect our Port Hills and indeed the peninsula as a whole. We're the ones that have been handed this environment, and this is not a want but a need, and it's going to be interesting to hear back from our communities about where they want this weighting. It's going to be an interesting journey because those needs and have-tos have to weigh up against the wants, because the wants are what gives your city its heart, that pumps the blood, that gives us its soul, it's a friendly smile and that twinkle in the eye to want people to be here. But you actually need the three waters and the roads to live here. So thank you.
Thank you. Pauline.
Thank you. Look, it's excellent news that for a start Audit and Risk are happy with our CD and have assured us that it complies with all the legislation, so that's a very, very good start. And I would like to mention the debt to revenue ratio paragraph in there, because it's important that this keeps us well under the 250% recommended by the New Zealand Funding Agency, and that allows us financial headroom if we have any unplanned call on our funds, remembering that the council will need to front fund 40% of any costs prior to the Crown's 60% contribution. So I think it's really important to note that. And another thing that we must also be prudent about and aware of is that the higher our capital investment in any facility, then the higher the operating costs will be for the ratepayer over the life of that asset, which may be 50 years or even more. So I want to hear from people about their views about the size and scale and scope of our proposed facilities, just to ensure that they're both appropriate and affordable into the future. And I especially welcome, as the Mayor alluded to in her opening statements, any proactive communities who want to build and operate their own facilities. There's a targeted rate mentioned in there too. This has come from the Akaroa community, looking at a way to fund a health hub, and I think that's worth actually pursuing a bit further and doing some work around that. I'm not sure how that would actually be implemented in the metropolitan area, but I'm very interested in that. It's good to see our major cycleway programs are the remainder of the 13 routes are planned for delivery over 10 years. And part of the reason for the 10 years from now is these extra challenges that we've faced. For instance, we thought we perhaps could take some routes down Kiwi Rail corridors, but have found that that's not workable. So extra money is required to choose different routes, which are often longer. There's also health and safety legislation concerning the rail barriers that have added to costs as well, and the massive consultation programs that we embark on with the people around each route. So it's comforting to know that so far we've completed the 3 full routes and 1 section of the Rapanui Shag Rock. And also, it's really good to know that the usage numbers are very impressive and growing daily. So we have a prudent program there which is affordable and deliverable over 10 years. And we're still able to access the Urban Cycleway Fund and the NZTA funds to assist us to do that. With our land drainage recovery program, which is intention to reduce the flooding in the pre-quake levels, but also while embracing environmental and waterway improvements where possible via our capital works. So we can see the $48 million that we spent in Flockton was deployed again yesterday and has proved to be effective in diverting thousands of cumecs of potential floodwaters away from people's homes. With the Heathcote area now the next priority, and work is being delivered now. So I think this draft LTP strikes a good balance, a balance to deliver levels of service, to continue our repairs, to embrace the opportunities for betterment and improving our biodiversity, our environment, and our city wherever possible, and responding to and being prepared to events, including climate change. And a balance between our rates increase, our timing and affordability of the capital program, and debt service ability. And Councillor Kewen mentioned inflation previously, but as far as I know, we use an inflation rate of 3.3%, which is actually the construction industry rate rather than the CPI, so that may make a little bit of difference to the way he looks at it. And although we'll see some deterioration in our wastewater assets due to delays in some renewals, and that is a little bit of concern, it's about prioritising these works across the whole broad program. We just can't have everything. And people may feedback on that and give us some guidance on what their priorities are. So we have here a preferred option in the document, and I really do look forward to people telling us if they have any preferences for one project over another, recognising that we're looking at substitutions at this stage in order to maintain a rates increase at under 5.5 along with our prudent level of debt, and that the public are aware they can do this, they can mix and match between the high and low, they don't have to have one or the other. The consultation document outlines very clearly what our financial challenges are, what our climate change challenges are, and that we still face considerable earthquake legacy repairs and restoration. So in the Papanui Innes ward, probably our main project is the, albeit controversial, Northern Arterial Link at $29 million, plus the downstream mitigation effects at 17. And this is big money for cars, and I think Councillor Templeton alluded to that previously. But we also have a new community centre for St Albans at $3 million. And of course we have a community-led project being the Edgeware Pool project, which is currently not included in any council budget, but it is a leader in the way that we would like things to be delivered by active communities. And I think we need to look at equity across our city when we're looking at these sorts of projects. So I'd like to reiterate others' views and comments on and thanking the staff who've laboured long and hard over this document for months and months and months, and with its contained strategies it's been an incredibly huge amount of work. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yanni, Dion, Anne and Mike.
Cool. I'll too endorse the work that's gone on into this, and you know, LTPs are never easy, and particularly excuse me, in a city where, you know, we have faced so many challenges in the last few years, so, you know, it does take a lot of effort to put these documents together. I think there's several important points to make in terms of context, and it's not just the impact of the earthquakes, but it is things like the forced amalgamation with the peninsula. The cost of taking on the peninsula has been absolutely massive to the city, and that happened long before the earthquake. The cost of the earthquakes and obviously the relationship with central government has been a huge issue. Interesting to note that when the council did its own central city plan, the cost was about 800 million of capital. The government came in with 1.2 billion. So, you know, it was on top of the 800 million. So there's been a huge cost put on the city, not just from the government, what it has or hasn't done as part of the cost share, but on other decisions that have also been made, like, for example, designating our central library as a site for a convention centre, which has meant that we didn't have the option of repairing the old central library if that was a choice that we made, given our financial predicament. So we've had to build it new at a huge cost. There's also been the decision to close, merge and relocate schools. And we're now, as a council, picking up the traffic safety improvements for those students because of the impact of those decisions. Decisions by the government, the previous government, to make it incredibly easy to demolish listed heritage buildings in our city, which our community felt strongly should be retained, has led to a huge demand on our heritage funding as a city. So asking the question, I think, of can we afford to fund private heritage buildings being fixed while our own publicly owned heritage buildings are put on hold, is a really important question to ask. There's been another, I think, layer to the increased cost and burden of us as a city, and that is the duplication and emergence of entities being set up after the earthquake. The cost of contractors, consultants, chief executives, boards of directors has been, I think, astronomical when you look at how much money is being spent on some of the projects, whether it's taxpayers or ratepayers. We seem to have enabled this huge proliferation of entities, often doing quite similar things, using similar resources at a huge cost before we make decisions. And I think we do need to look at that and look at how we can get a lot better synergy and efficiency. And for me, it comes down to actually council should be delivering some of these things rather than having separate new agencies doing it. But, you know, there may be opportunities to look at that going forward. We really do need to focus, I think, on the operational. Well, we've heard a lot today about the capital, but actually the operational, the basic maintenance of our city is a really important thing that we need to get on top of. And I welcome having that conversation with our community and looking at how we can improve that. I totally endorse the idea that, you know, we should be proud to be considered a garden city, and we should try and make Christchurch beautiful again, because the psychological impact on people's well-being of living in broken neighbourhoods, broken suburbs with untidy parks and messy streets, it is actually quite significant, and I think it is important that we address that. Can I just make a few other points? One is that in regards to the budget, I still think that this budget is, in terms of the capital, it's more of a coffee and croissants budget than a bread and butter budget. And I think that's the real key thing that we need to address. There's some things in our budget which to me simply make no sense at all. Park Terrace is scheduled to have a $3 million upgrade after we've just fixed it. So I can't understand why we'd be spending money. If you look at some of the intersection safety improvements in the Accessible City program, there's a whole bunch of money being spent again and again on the same stretch of roads that are linked into other projects, which again, it seems a huge duplication and waste. It also seems to be unnecessarily gold plating the central city. Hereford Street, for 2 blocks, we're proposing to spend $4 million in the central city. How far would that go to fixing some of the broken roads in the suburbs? A long way, I would suggest. Cathedral Square, we've doubled the funding for Cathedral Square. We had 4.6 million in the cost share. This budget is proposing to go to nearly 10 million. We've got central city development contributions going to, I think, what are some of the wealthiest people in the city, and we're putting, you know, money in for private developers to have central city rebate contributions when we can't afford to fix our own social housing. What does that say about our priorities? People have touched on the Northern Arterial improvements. You know, the irony of spending, you know, close to $70 million on those improvements for cars coming into the central city, while spending a huge amount of money on cycleways to try and encourage people to use alternative means of transport, while slowing the central city down and trying to remove cars from the central city. It seems to be a real contradiction. And it's
I didn't put the clock on, but
right, okay.
I thought people were playing.
Okay, no, that's fine. Okay, I'll wrap up. So just to say that, you know, there's still a long way to go, I think, of fixing this capital program. I think there's a huge opportunity to still make some savings. I just wanted to conclude with 2 points. One is that I totally endorse the comment that rates are not an affordable way forward. It simply is not reasonable to expect our community to continually face rates increases to fund the things that we need to do in a city, and I welcome the opportunity to look at that. And finally, I'll just leave with a quote from Edward de Bono, and just before I do that, I just wanted to just give you the example of, or I'll read the quote first and finish with the example. In the future, he says, instead of striving to be right at a high cost, it will be more appropriate to be flexible and plural at a lower cost. If you cannot accurately predict the future, then you must flexibly be prepared to deal with the various possible futures. And in conclusion, I just want to say, I had the privilege of going to the Littleton Farmers Market on the weekend and going to London Street, where the council just closed the street. We didn't spend $10 million or $16 million, as we've got in our accessible city, on that street. We simply, by closing the street, you got a much better, safer pedestrian environment that gave a real sense of community. So there's ways that we can save money, and I give you as that a real tangible example. Thank you. I just ask that you also put the cathedral levy separate, so that those of us who didn't support it previously can have our votes recorded against.
That's not the vote today. It's it will be put separately when we get to the end of the LTP. Dion.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing actually about that, but I'm not too happy with this, to be quite honest. I have some struggles, and the first thing that I have struggles with is part of this. I've got 4 key points I want to talk about. Actually, there's 5. The first reason that I'm not too happy about this is the way we are proposing this to our communities. Almost every core fundamental part of what a council does in terms of its infrastructure is going backwards over the next 10 years. I don't think that's acceptable. I really don't. Our road network, and I'll just give me a second and I'll just go back to the right screen that I had here. Our carriageway is decreasing in standard by 10% over the next 10 years. That's our roads, the surfaces. The stormwater is going backwards by about 5% compared to where it is now. Our wastewater is going backwards by about 5%. I'm pleased to see our freshwater supply is going up a little bit. But we're putting rates up. They're at double what they were before the earthquake. And I know we have some major financial constraints around the earthquake and the recovery. But I don't think we are fighting hard enough for our city, is my gut feeling. We need to be going to the government of the last government, this government, and saying, actually, you guys really need to support this city. We are a big player in the South Island, and you guys need to support the city, because I am really upset that our main core infrastructure is going backwards in this plan that we're proposing. Now, I want people to dig into this and look at it. There's a lot of information in this. Actually, there's a heck of a lot of information, and this is just on the capital stuff. One of the things I'm talking about with OPEX, I don't think we as a council have had a real dig into the OPEX. I know they have in the staff, and there's probably that mix about management versus staff. But we need to, because I'm looking at this, and I did some rough calculations last night, and amongst all the other stuff that was going on around flooding. If we spent another $25 million on the roads over the next 2 years, if you look at the spreadsheets or the graphs that we get, it would be the same equivalent that we spend $2 million in OPEX. And we are going to be spending that anyway. So if we spent $25 million more on road improvements, we would get $2 million savings in OPEX, which is actually the same rates impact that you would have versus the OPEX if we're going to be charging rates, or the CAPEX if we're going to be borrowing it to do the work. So I think there's some real deep dives that we need to look at in that respect. I think there's some savings that we can have long term and actually make the city a better place in terms of the level of service. The cycleways stuff, I have to say this. If you look at the cycleways initially, it was $56 million, $68 million, sorry. After a Dutch person came here, it was changed to $156 million because they went from on-street to off-street. If you look at this this long-term plan, we're asking for another $206 million on top of what we're spending. Yes, yes. You look at it; it's in the consultation document. We have to ask we have to ask people. It's before the rebate. Yes, there is rebate, but we still have to foot a lot of that money, and we have to. I want people to actually look at that and go, what do you value? What do you want right now? because we don't have the money to keep the basic infrastructure up. And that does concern me. One of the comments was to do more costs more. Yes, in reality it does, but with the example that I just said before, doing more actually means we'd save in the long run in terms of the operational costs that we have as a city. Doing less will cost more. So that the equation doesn't necessarily work as easy as it sounds, and I know there's probably more complications in that factor, but I do really feel that we need to do a bit more work on getting that, and especially around the core infrastructure. And the infrastructure strategy is public, it's part of this, and we don't talk about it enough. I just think we need to be spending more money, the money that we do get in, prudently, sensibly and strategically around the long-term infrastructure stuff. And when we're talking about revenue, I mean, a fuel tax is great in theory and stuff like that, but I'm going to repeat it here that I've said a number of times before. We already pay 15 to 20 cents per litre more than Auckland. Now, so in effect, we're already subsidising the North Island for their fuel and the South Island. So we need to say to the government, yes, fuel tax might actually help local government, but you need to regulate that industry first, because otherwise we're just doubly taxing our poor people in Christchurch. The residents are going to be paying a tax anyway. Council companies, yes, I've had a quick look at that, and I do think the city has more assets in terms of the companies that we own than we did pre-earthquake, because we've bought we've acquired some and bought more for the port. But are they performing the way that we wanted them to perform? Are we actually getting what we wanted to get out of them? I do not think so. I think we need to have some actually, how are they going to deliver for the city? Not just in a financial way, but actually how can they benefit the residents of the city, not just us as a city council. The other thing that I think about when I think about revenue is everybody pays GST on rates. There's a tax on top of a tax. That's a free $50 to $60 million tax for the government. I think they should be just sending it back to us and saying, here you go, here's your GST on your rates, and that's actually $50 to $60 million of revenue we could just have overnight. And all councils should be looking at that, actually, because it's not fair for ratepayers who are paying a tax and then having to pay a GST tax on that again. And the other thing that I think we need to be looking at is the depreciation on our assets. We're building a brand new city, we've got all these brand new assets, and the government changed laws, and it's actually affecting how we can do our tax take and other things like that in terms of what we can borrow against. But I just wanted to finish on the central city. When it comes to transport into the central city, I think we really need to not just think about cycleways. We need to be thinking about public transport. So we need to be going cap in hand with, say, ECAN and actually looking at this in the long-term plan process that both our councils are going through and saying, how can we make our public transport system work? In the long-term plan, you'll notice we're spending $23 million on buying the bus exchange. If we don't have people using buses, we're not going to be getting a good return on investment on that great asset that the government did build as part of the recovery plan. So really, I mean, I'm not happy about us reducing our levels of service and other. There's also, I'll start that again. There's also level of services in OPEX where we have had an example identified and that's been moved, but there are other things in there that I think a lot of people would open their eyes at and balk at. And I really encourage people, if they're going to be looking at this long-term plan, to look into those details around what is actually in, what's out, and actually understand that. And I'm going to stop there. I think I've said enough, but that's just where I sit with this at the moment.
Thank you. There's a Māori proverb that says, "Ma pango, ma whero, ka ote te mahi." If worker and chief pull together, the job is done. We're in this together. The main challenge for us all has been to balance the significant cost of work that needs to be done on our infrastructure, the speed with which the work is done, and rates affordability. We have worked together to keep the proposed average rates increase as low as possible while we work to complete remaining earthquake repairs, renew ageing infrastructure, and maintain a focus on regeneration. This draft LTP proposes to keep rates at an acceptable level by deferring some aspects of the capital program and maintaining the current rate of borrowing. This proposal meets our obligations imposed on every local authority, which include ensuring prudent stewardship and the efficient and effective use of the city's resources, including effectively planning for future management of our assets. We would not be here without an incredibly hard-working team who have gathered information to bring us answered endless questions, often the same ones over and over, responded to requests for ever more information graciously and patiently. We are indeed fortunate to have such a team of people who themselves are residents, who go over and above for the good of the city. So thank you for the work that you've done. I'd love this, this proverb to widen, to include our whole community, so that we are all working together. Going forward, we need to build active citizens by valuing and listening to our young people, building their sense of responsibility to partner with us and to care for each other and our place. We can do so much more when we work together. Mā pango, mā whero, ka ote te mahi. We can do this together.
Thank you. I agree with Dion on one of his points. I think sometimes we look too hard at the capital project and forget actually about the operational side, and not around the maintenance, because that needs work, but there's a lot of other things that we spend money on, like the amount of money we give to DCL, Regenerate Christchurch. It's phenomenal, and this is where the real rates increases come from. I'd just like to correct Dion around the cycleways. We're not looking to add an additional $200 million. It's an additional $90 million, and up to 66% of that's actually refunded by NZTA and the government. So I think that's an important thing to factor in. Look, we're at a difficult point of time where, you know, we've got the cost of rebuilding a city, not just back to what we had before, but actually what's right for both now and into the future. Also continue to provide the core services without creating a rates burden on the people calling Christchurch home today. I personally don't think we've got that balance right. The mechanism that we collect rates does not work. We have so many people actually on fixed incomes, many of whom are elderly, that are struggling, and we need to look at ways how we can collect revenue from different streams, and potentially fuel tax may be that. I think they would need to really expand to be more sub-regional fuel tax, as we have so many people moving out to Waimakere and Selwyn that still work in Christchurch and commute in here, putting so much wear and tear on the roads that we fund to repair. So we need to look at ways. We're losing rates by that, but yet we're still paying for that infrastructure. I do look forward to listening to the people and hearing what they have to say about this proposed long-term plan. I don't agree we've got the balance right. I do not think 5.5% is acceptable. We cannot continually have 5% plus rates increases. It just does not work. There are a couple of points in the draft LTP that I just want to focus on today, and one of them is the major cycleways program, which in this draft is actually proposed to be pushed right out until 2028, which is 14 years after it was started. And while bizarrely there is some belief that these cycleways are everywhere, this program is only 100 kilometres of cycleways, which represents under 5% of the total transport network in the city, adding to the only 50 kilometres of off-road cycleways that the city had before the program began. Then we're told it costs too much, when the majority of this program is not funded by rates. If we want to look at a transport infrastructure project that, in my opinion, gives bugger all benefit to Christchurch and costs more than the entire cycleway program, we just have to look at the 12-kilometre, $240 million Christchurch Northern Corridor, of which, although originally the council share was $31 million, there's actually $63 million from previous and future council budgets for this project, plus another $15 million for downstream effects. That is a huge amount of capital money spent on a very, very small
road end project. And what does it do? It adds thousands of noisy CO2 emitting cars into a peaceful suburb and will add zero benefit to the people of St Albans. However, the actual benefits of increasing active transport is huge on so many levels, and completing the full network of cycleways is integral to this. I want to focus on one benefit of one of the completed cycleways, which is the Papanui Parallel. It goes past St Albans Primary, St Albans Catholic, Paparoa Street School, 2 preschools. It is a stone's throw away to another 3 schools, including Papanui High School. It goes past the Grand Condon Centre. It links up to the cycleway along the rail corridor, which goes past another 2-3 schools. This cycleway was built with the majority of funding coming from NZTA and the government. It now provides safe transport environment for so many children to get to school. The question is, why would we want to delay this opportunity for other Christchurch kids? New Zealand last year saw the number of cyclists killed on our roads nearly quadruple, and we know young children that cycle are vulnerable. Providing safe cycling infrastructure is so important. We've lost a generation to cycling, and we cannot afford to wait any longer, and providing safe cycling infrastructure is key to this. You know, I could have moved an amendment today to try and pull the funding back into where it was previously agreed, but I'm happy to listen to the people of Christchurch and get a mandate from them, because this is important. It must be said though, if we do not get these cycleways completed, and if we do not improve active transport and public transport, what we've been seeing in the CBD over recent times with the congestion will pale in comparison to what we're going to see in the near distant future. We need to act, but I will listen to the people and then we'll act at that point. On another note, at a community level, it is extremely disappointing to see that the rebuild of the once very popular Shirley Community Centre has been deferred so far out it doesn't even make the proposed 10-year plan. This is unbelievable that a previously well-used community centre, which was destroyed by the earthquakes, has left a hole in the community that will not be rebuilt until 20 years after the earthquake. How is this acceptable? What other communities will have this length of delay at the same time there's other projects that have been added since the last long-term plan, or have had massive increases in funding? For one example, Naval Point has gone from $750,000 to $10 million, yet this community still goes without a community centre. As a community board, we've advocated for this community, and for some reason we make one step forward just to get booted back another 2 steps. I don't think it's acceptable. Once again, I will wait and listen to the submissions, and then at that point I'll make an amendment once the people say that it's also not acceptable. I will support the draft long-term plan going out for public consultation, but I urge my fellow councillors, it's time to listen. The city is about to speak.
Thank you. Well, I'll just close the debate, and I think that I'm really pleased with the quality of the debate and how people have contributed their views, their passions, their concerns, and their support for elements of the draft long-term plan. And I reiterate, it is a draft. It is going out for public consultation, and we do invite the public to have their say. But I kind of want to go back to the sort of essential question that we are asking our community, and that is that there is a balance between the significant cost of the work that needs to be done on our infrastructure, the speed at which that work is done, and rates affordability. And they are the 3 core critical elements that have to come together when we resolve the long-term plan. We have strived to keep the proposed rates increase as low as possible. Is it as low as possible? That is the question that we ask ourselves. Could we reduce it? We asked staff to look at that. They told us that we would have real concerns over some of our core infrastructure if we reduced it further. But it is behoving on us to actually drill into that. I agree with the points that have been made. Are we able to do better than that? And also we have to look at that the levels of service, we have to look at the level of rates increases, and we have to look at the level of debt, and a number of you have commented on all of those. So I think that this has been an incredibly good debate, because what it shows is that this is a draft, it is going out for public feedback. We do invite that feedback, and I think it's going to mean that the debate that we have when we finally have the final draft in front of us for consideration will be a very powerful one indeed. So thank you to each and every one of you, and thank you to the staff for all of the incredible work that you've put in so far. There is a lot more work to be done, and in these times of floods, a lot more water to flow under the bridge. So on that note, I will put the resolution. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That is carried. And we move on to the authorisation for the General Manager, Finance and Commercial, etc., to make any amendments. That's not amendments so that you can ask your own questions, but just to tidy up, to make sure alignment with the Auditor General's report, and then approving the process for consultation. So I'll move that, and Andrew will second that, and I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. And what's next? Oh, so do we move that we reapply standing orders, or do they just? I can just close the meeting. Right. On that note, I declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much. Good work.